I welcome everyone who ever listens to this recording, and I would say this is an exceptional one, and not necessarily because of the quality and the message of the recording itself, rather it is because it shows towards a direction which all humanity has held as the highest good, as something that is above all the time. But during the times it became very impure, hindered. So therefore we would like to shed some light again on this highest quality, which was praised by wise and fool, and let it be again like that. And as you could see on the picture, we said freedom above all. Now, what would that mean? So if we look at what people say, they say that they want to be free, they want to be happy, the freedom of speech, the freedom of doing whatever you would like to do as long as you are in the field of the laws. So this is what people basically think that is freedom, that thing which was fought out by our fathers, and this is why we should value it. But now I would like to come to a point in this certain freedom, because this freedom that people started to speak of started to become another type of bondage. Number one, because it started to become a bondage, is because it became a view, an opinion. So namely, our fathers fought for it, so we must value it and we must remember it every year, even several times if it's the case. So for example, national holidays and such views held by people to be the celebration of freedom. But if you truly look at it, how can somebody be truly free if the basis of this freedom is to be bound of a past happening, if it is bound to something that was fought with blood and hate? Those people didn't fight out of compassion. Even if they had to kill, they killed because of hate. And now, as a national or whatever holiday, we celebrate that they killed for us to be free. But if you look at it, people think that they are free, but in reality, as long as there's suffering, as long as there are mental hindrances, there are fetters, whatever step you make, you sooner or later will end up in a certain type of suffering, a certain type of being in the web, not being able to move anywhere else. So why do we value? What is that freedom that then we should truly value? Well, that freedom that doesn't come, number one, from views and opinions. That freedom which is in fact the freedom from views and opinions. And here you see the mistake in the equation, that we think that freedom comes when we have a view about freedom rather than freedom itself. It's just the same thing like holding the view that there is no self, but ultimately finding self in something. Just an example. Or another type of example would be to say that there is liberation, but in the meantime not to care to move an inch to get there. So this freedom above all, we mean the freedom, even if there is this desire to be free, then that you hold as the highest value, that is also in a way not to the point, because again, there is a bondage. So basically, if you look at all these different types of freedom proposed by beings, we see that the issue is that it is always incident on a certain object, so to say. It's always incident on something conditional. What do I mean by conditional? Anything that came to be because something else has come to be is to be seen as conditional. And because the freedom of speech and the freedom of the nation and all these things are conditional things, in the sense that they came to be. Even the nation is not something eternal. It came to be through evolution, period. It is not self-existent. It exists if people make it exist, but besides that, it doesn't have an independent individual existence. And therefore, whatever freedom we find in such conditional things, objects, such as views, even the view of freedom, or political freedom, or whatever freedom, in the ultimate sense, we again end up in bondage because we are incident on something, we are trapped by these objects. It's very interesting to understand what does it mean to be trapped by objects. Well, if you look at a being, let's say an animal, like a wild bear or wolf, okay? You see that all their senses are continuously jumping from object to object. So if there's a wolf in the wild, its hearing is continuously alert so that if there is danger, they can go. Their smell, taste, and their desire for the hunt is continuously there. And you can see that it's like a web. From all the senses, there is a web coming out where objects are fed to the senses, so to say, like metaphorically speaking. And like that, all the time, the attention is moving into the outside objects, which means that wherever that certain being goes, wherever it does whatever thing, it will continuously be in this web of objects, that here's an object, now there's an object, there's always a contact with an object, physical or mental, and when there is contact, there's always a feeling. And feeling is something like a shadow coming after us, because whatever object you may perceive, right at that moment, there is a feeling already in the mind or in the body. And therefore, feeling is like a shadow that we might not be always aware of. That feeling comes whenever we have contact with an object, but this is the factuality, because feeling is the result, the outcome of the contact with the object. And therefore, even this feeling becomes a bondage. So for example, another type of freedom that many times beings speak of is to want to be happy, but let's look at it very closely. To want to be happy simply means to continuously have objects on whom, when contact happens, there is a joyful feeling, period. So this happiness that people search for is continuously there, only that right now, perception, consciousness is also incident on objects which are not so pleasant. But basically what this happiness means is to see objects and to experience objects that are pleasant for a long time. So this is what basically means to want to be happy. But if you look at this, this also becomes an obsession. So for example, if you speak about the fully enlightened being, this is also just a concept, oh, I want to be happy. So happiness itself as a feeling, like a joyous feeling, is a factuality. So it is a type of feeling. However, when we speak about, oh, I want to be happy, now that happy already becomes a view, an opinion, a mental formation, because it's not existentially there. It becomes just a fabrication, wishful thinking. And therefore, one should also see that feelings are impermanent, just as all the other things in which we can try to find freedom, because they depend on contact. So imagine that the mind entered a certain point, a certain place where consciousness is not incident on any object. Okay, so objectively speaking, why couldn't there be a like even if we don't have experiential proof about it. But why couldn't there be, for example, a place and a space where simply the mind abandons all these different objects and simply doesn't tend towards any type of object. So it tends towards the objectless, so to say. Then what could be the outcome? Like very logically speaking, even giving up what we know from before about the void, the signless, the desireless. But just imagining that to see that all these phenomena here that we call freedom or the freedom of speech, but how can you be free of speech when all the speech that you make is continuously intervened by different views, then already is bondage. But let's imagine a state where the mind doesn't find any object because it turns away from all the objects and tends only towards the objectless, something which is devoid of any type of sign of, so to say, of objects. What could we say about this state, please?
There's a lot to say. It'll be very quiet, extremely quiet and peaceful. A peace that continues on, because in the object world, those objects come and go. Even what we call people, they come and they go, and it's you have a good time and it's there and you're peaceful, and it rises and it falls. But in this state, and that's what Ma saw. There was always something else. It's like, why can't anything just calm down and just be peaceful? But you couldn't find it here. I kept looking for what's peaceful. What's the ultimate to calm all of this down, rather than to keep seeking and seeking, or dependent. Actually, what it was the dependency outside of Ma. We're like, we don't want that. We don't want to have something outside us yanking our chain, pulling us this way or that way. We want it internal. We want it right here.
Thank you very much. So you said quiet and peaceful. Now, would you comment on that? Is it peaceful in the sense of like, oh, I feel peaceful right now because of whatever reason? Like, is it peaceful in the sense of feeling, or in what sense is it peaceful?
No, it's not. It's not feeling. It's not object. It's not thought. It's not place. It's independent. It has no dependency.
Okay, very well. So just very logically thinking, if we know that feelings that are like a shadow continuously coming and going happens when there's contact with some object, then if there is a moment, let's say like that, where there is no object, where the mind tends towards this, so to say, this peace, then there cannot be even a feeling because there is no contact. Now the question, it's very interesting because many times, speaking of, for example, Advaita Vedanta, mukti or liberation is always sometimes referred to as the release of awareness. So awareness release, this is many times what it's called. It's never called the destruction of awareness or such things, because what actually happens, we have this thing what we call consciousness, which is of two types. Now, consciousness normally refers to getting to know something, to perceive. So consciousness has also the factor of perception, of perceiving, of getting to know something. So this would be a so-called mundane consciousness, because wherever jhanas you go, wherever physical you go, there's always a certain perception of a certain object. But let's imagine, and this type of consciousness is always called, of course, impermanence and the cause of suffering. Why? Because it changes, it doesn't have, so to say, an independency, because this awareness only depends on the objects that we perceive. However, if we speak about a type of consciousness, well, it's not even the best word to describe it as a consciousness, but that is the closest thing. If we call it a consciousness, which no longer actually perceives, it's no longer incident on any object, because the incidence on an object we can call contact with the object. If it's not incident on anything, we cannot say that it becomes inexistent, because it's not because of the objects that consciousness becomes existent, but from Advaita point of view, so from the non-duality point of view, we can see consciousness as like normally we refer to it as like pure awareness when there is no incidence on objects. But if pure awareness descends into samsara, then that becomes the consciousness that is part of the five aggregates. So therefore, those are seen as impermanent, whereas a consciousness which is not incident on any object is completely free from the, so to say, the hindrance and the impurity of all these mundane type of objects. Then we see that this is how they refer to it. This consciousness is without a surface. Now, what does it mean? It means that, number one, it doesn't have the tendency to create anything, to land on anything. And number two, that it doesn't find a landing spot. So it neither has the tendency to do so, and that it becomes evident, this surfaceless consciousness becomes evident when the mind doesn't tend to land on any type of surface, any type of landing point, which would be a certain object like beings or elements or colors or thoughts. And then there would be a surfaceless consciousness. So how can we know that in fact there is a consciousness? Well, in a way, whoever has spoken, like speaking of Vivekananda or Yogananda, whenever they describe, for example, such states of liberation, of mukti, the whole point was that we want to release this consciousness from the web of different objects. And beyond that, if you speak about the teachings of the Buddha, then, how could you testify the existence of, for example, Nirvana, like an ultimate freedom, if there were no consciousness that was, released? So, for example, how can we prove that consciousness is not destroyed when one enters liberation, mukti, is by two reasons. And both of them I will take from the teaching of the Buddha. So the number one is that they always say, it is said like this, that when consciousness becomes unestablished and non-dwelling, it is then that somebody has realized nirvana. And on the other hand, when, for example, an Arahant disciple described how this liberation can be experienced here and now without waiting for an after-death freedom, he says that this liberation can be experienced here and now when one doesn't attend to the signs of existence and attends to the signless. And this is why many times they say that an Arahant is not just the mere destruction of the feathers, but also the realization of the desireless, of the signless. So it is one thing that the mind doesn't tend towards the signs, and it's another thing that it tends to the signless. And when one wants to emerge from this absolute real freedom, then it is said that they either are not attentive anymore of the signless, or that they start to become attentive of the signs of existence. Now, what are the signs of existence? Any conditional phenomena can be seen as a sign of existence. A thought, a karma, any resultant, all these things, to look at them and to start to be aware of them and not of the signless, is how, for example, one can emerge from this unestablished consciousness. Well, it's not utterly correct to say unestablished consciousness, because that is only in the case of an arahant. But in the case of a stream enterer, once-returner, or non-returner, even though their consciousness is not unestablished, because when they emerge from the experience of this supramundane consciousness, this consciousness beyond the world, they still have greed, hatred, and delusion in one way or in another way. So, but in that moment when they are established in the realization of this consciousness, this supramundane consciousness, then they themselves are unestablished, because, so to say, if the word, the signs can be seen as karma, then the signless can be seen as the end of all karma. So in that moment, there is no karma, there is no generation, there is no here, there, or in between for someone who is in a fruition, in the fruit of realizing the peace, as Ma referred to it, the quiet. So this is the reason, for example, for which in the ancient times of India, the absolute reality, or this freedom, was always called Satchitananda, which means existence, consciousness, bliss. And I would like to reflect on that from this absolute freedom point of view, this freedom above all. Why would we even try to call it existence, when previously I said that it is the science of suffering that is existence? Because only something which doesn't alter can be called existent, because anything else, what we would call existent in the supreme, in the mundane world, continuously rises and falls, so continuously changes. Therefore, it doesn't have, so to say, an absolute existence. It continuously changes. That is its reality. Therefore, they continuously change. There is no substratum. And here we don't speak about a substratum, an essence, about Satchitananda either. It is simply the fact that because it doesn't change, because there is no alternation, because it is realized when the mind doesn't tend towards alternating things, like changing things. That is why we can call it existent, because it doesn't decompose and recompose and rise and fall. That is why we call it peace. Because of these signs of change, one type of existence becomes suffering, one type of a plane of existence, so to say. But if there is no object but the objectless, there are no signs but the signless, then it cannot alter, because it is devoid of any sign of reality, so to say. Then why do we call it Chit, which means consciousness? Is because of this reason, that Nirvana, or the ultimate, has always been realized when somebody gave up all landing spots. So even if they, for example, an arahant enters a jhana, which you might call a landing spot, and you might be right, we don't call, whenever arahant enters a jhana, for example, we don't call it wholesome, because normally we call it a wholesome thing, because there is wisdom in there, there is concentration in there, so we call it wholesome. But in the case of an arahant, we call it functional, or kriya. Kriya means also action, but functional in the sense that that type of jhana, in the case of an arahant, just arises to fulfill its function. So it is just a mere appearance, and then its disappearance without any residue. So that is the reason for which, even though it seems that an arahant lands on an object, and even when they see and taste and smell, they land on objects because there is contact with an object. However, because simply for them existence has ceased, because they have seen through this rise and fall, and that they have realized the signless, because their awareness is unestablished. There is no landing ultimately, there is just the mere appearance and disappearance of the signs of existence. This is how they don't get actually landed on a certain plane of existence or on in the future, because after their death, it is the signless that they are released to. And this is why we call it a consciousness, because there is this awareness, only that it is released. It is not as the awareness in the mundane world where we see, taste, smell, and even think. It is without any objects, without anything that it could be incident on and be landed on. And then ultimately we call it ananda or bliss for the same reason, as more reflected on this supramundane, so beyond the world state, that it is peaceful, because there is no fluctuation, there is no alternation, and the only time when this supreme bliss is destroyed, not destroyed but experientially, is when we start to be aware of what is going on in the world, so namely the science of existence. And then we don't keep going in that state, but this simply happens because there is still the mind and or a form, and that is why we cannot stay in that, for example, freedom for too long of time. But it is very much possible to stay there for days, and therefore it is indeed to be seen as the supreme peace. And as Mo said, it's peaceful because there is no fluctuation, there is no change, because what could change? And now I would like to make a reference to what we have spoken about previously, that namely the void, because in fact the signless, the desireless, and the void are the same thing, but the void is especially useful to be contemplated, because then we see that simply there is this freedom in this way that, so there are all these objects around us, and many times we might feel that we are the sufferer. But if we look at all these things as just continuously dismantling and mantling and mounting and dismounting, then at some point we find this freedom. Oh, well, indeed there is no sufferer, there is just the mere suffering, because the changing words is devoid of an essence, and everything is devoid of an essence, and therefore there you can find this freedom. Many times we think that we are happy because there is one being that experiences happiness, but that's not the truth. So for example, a friend of ours told us once, but if there is no self, then even the supreme bliss that you speak of will not be experienced, because there is no experiencer. But the matter of fact is that never ever in our lives has there been an experiencer on whose behalf there was happiness, for example. That was the mere appearance of happiness through contact in the mind, in the alternation of experience and period. So as there has never been an experiencer, and bliss has never come because of an experiencer. Bliss has always come when the experiencer was give up. Even in those moments of happiness, like more sublime happiness than the physical one, you may see that you even forget for a moment that you exist, because you simply, this idea of the I is given up because the mind then tends towards a greater bliss, a greater happiness than that given by the I. And if you look at it, there is this attachment to the I and the myself and all these identities and all these existences, whereas you can see that most of the times it brings only suffering right away. And even if it doesn't bring suffering, because it's an obsession, this is what I mean. But even if it doesn't bring suffering right away, it brings suffering on a later account. So I will give an example. If there's an identity that I am this, just the mere obsession that I feel forced by myself to identify with something is already a bondage, because I cannot be free of ideologies because I want to be incident on objects. I even force myself to be incident on certain objects so that I might assume that I am this and this is not me. But to, for example, to reflect on insight knowledges which we have spoken about, the last one was the one before the last one was equanimity towards formations, and after that was conformity. Now this equanimity towards formations simply means, to put it very simply, these are not me, nor are they myself, nor are they anything connected to any self, and nor is the self in them, and nor am I in them, and nor are they in me. So not to take any formation, and the formations are to be seen as the 5 aggregates, to the form, the feeling, the perception, as in the sense of memory, mental formations in the sense of belief and views, and then experience itself. And then if you look at these as such, and you simply don't take, you are equanimous, absolutely careless about them. So you simply don't feel the inclination to take them as yourself or anything that is connected to a self. Then we say that a being has reached equanimity towards formations. And of course it happens in steps and in depths, but this is, for example, what it means, this equanimity towards formations. So in that state, in that moment, the being simply doesn't tend towards taking any formation as itself or belonging to itself. And that is how it progresses towards the void. Because there is no me and mine, then simply it will tend, if insight is deep enough and concentration is deep enough, then it will tend towards the void. Because the mind is not inclined to tend towards the formations, it will tend towards something which has never been formed, whose nature is to be unformed, unbound. And that would be what we call the void or the Atman. It is really the same thing, or we might even call it Shunyata. Because there is no alternation, and that is how it becomes blissful, because finally a safe spot from those formations is found. And it's very interesting to again remark that here there is a type of consciousness, because as how could those who emerge testify the validity of this supreme bliss? Only that this is why they call it supramundane, that is why it's beyond that. We might as well think that there is nothing there, because it is non-manifestative, like nothing is manifested, because that is how, the only way how lasting peace can be found, if it is non-manifestive, if it's unbound, if it's unhindered and beyond impurities. So that is what really should be held as the freedom above everything else, because all these things, generations, destination, happiness, sorrow, friend, foe, ally, enemy, like, dislike, friend and best friend, all these things you must see as surfaces for consciousness to land on. They are something like, yes, it's not a problem that one has friends, but ultimately, if one just looks at those, just look at those that beings, those are just simple mere beings as oneself. So there is no need to, create these concepts. Oh, your friend, you are not a friend. You are a friend, but I have a greater friend. Because all these things, for example, friend and best friend, come from feelings. And simply you decide who is a friend and who is a best friend on behalf of the intensity of the feeling. And there is nothing else on whose behalf you decide this. And if you look at it as all the friend and best friend and the foe arise from the mind, not from reality, then that is how, slowly the mind gives up these ideas that, oh, I have family, enemies, friends, favorite food, not favorite food, favorite color, not favorite color, because one becomes equanimous towards formations of the world. And that is how one can enter the signless or this void. And then we say that that being has absolutely escaped samsara. So that was the thing that we wanted to discuss for today, this freedom. If anyone would like to have any questions or would like to add anything to it, please.
This is Mabi, and I find this quite fascinating, and it's hard for me to quite understand and grasp it as being, as me understanding being in this human body, because we have feelings, and how to let go of those feelings when, say, there's someone that you love, or someone gets hurt, or someone dies. How do you not have these feelings? And how do you not? Sometimes I feel like I have no feelings. I really do, and I feel like, here I'm saying I feel, but it's a strange feeling, I guess, to not have feelings. And I've worried about myself sometimes about not having feelings. But as in this human form, it seems like we're built to have feelings. We're built to have desires. We're built to have fears and disappointments. So would you address this a little bit? How do you step away from some of that? I mean, it should be easy, but it's found to be difficult.
Thank you very much. Yes. Okay. So as long as one is in any type of body or mind, and I say mind because, so for example, if one has great concentration and deep concentration and enters in like an experience of infinite space, for example, then there is only just the mind, not the body. But even an absolute enlightened being, so to say, as long as they see something or they hear something or they touch something or they enter a jhana, there is feeling. So as long as there is mundane experience going on, and by mundane mean everything that is not the beyond, there will be feeling. So even an arahant feels joyful feeling when in a jhana, or can have joyful feeling when they see another being, or for example, if they practice loving kindness or compassion or joyful appreciation, there's feeling, there is it cannot be avoided to have this feeling, because when there's contact, there is feeling. So if you remember when we discussed the dog chained to the tree, and I asked, what is the whole problem here? And you yourself said that it is the chain. And here the problem also is with the chain, that there will be form, there will be feeling, there will be memory, like factually there is memory, there are choices, so to say, and there is experience going on. So as long as one continues to exist, all these things keep going. However, if one doesn't find any connection, any attachment to all these things, then there is mindfulness, about which Mo asked us some days ago. And simply mindfulness would mean that when a feeling arises, there is this investigation, there is this acknowledgement, yes, there is a feeling right now. But when we speak about, as you said, disappointment, fear, basically they are also just feelings on the bottom line. Yes, there is also a bit of mental formation because like a view in the sense of this has to be feared, and then there's also fear, but unpleasant mental feeling, But basically, if you just look at them, now there is unpleasant feeling. There is pleasant feeling. Right now there is neutral feeling. And it cannot be avoided to have these feelings going on as long as there is a mundane type of experience. So smelling, tasting, touching, or a mental process. Only that there is no need to say that it is yourself or that it is part of you or that there is more to it than the simple feeling, because even if you say, oh, I love you so much, you have to look at it as there is a feeling and that is what happens. And we surf on the feeling, or maybe the feeling surfs on us. I will let it open for discussion. But the point is that when we feel that love, when somebody dies and we have, for example, grief, even that is just a feeling. And mindfully, if you look at it, you saw there was perception in the mind of a dead body who could have been who maybe was a family member, but right away family member becomes a mental formation in the sense that, yes, it's a factuality that we have parents and we have siblings and so on. However, when the moment we think about them, it's like something more than a similar genome, like DNA, that's already something mistake, because we think that, oh, we have to love those who are closer to us more. Why so? It's already something that we imposed. Why would that be relevant? Or why should we hate those who at all? Or maybe hate is not the best example, but there is no need to see more. Why would we even try to see more in those happenings than what they are? We want to color things out. Oh, that friend of mine passed and right now I suffer. But if you just simply realized, oh, there is unpleasant mental feeling, period, then you wouldn't overcomplicate. You wouldn't go into the labyrinth, because you see that also happens, this whole labyrinth also happens out of your own mind, not out of something else. And because there is this, oh, I had the same story with that being, so that right now when they are no more, I have this unpleasant feeling, but it is just an unpleasant feeling. You may call it grief, or you may call it fear or hate. It is an unpleasant mental feeling. And the baseline is this, that there is an unpleasant feeling in that. And if you see feelings for what they are, and forms like bodies for what they are, namely a bunch of atoms, period, that if there is no attachment to that, these feelings may come, may go, or you may enter this supramundane by insight, not by insight, by wisdom, and then there is no, so to say, feeling, so in that sense. So this is how you can understand. This is not that we want to avoid, oh, feeling, I want to avoid it. Because if you try to avoid it, again, you have unpleasant feeling towards feelings themselves. So that, again, doesn't work. It is simply, as Bodhidharma would say, don't love life and death, but don't hate life and death. Now, what does it mean? If you love life and death, then you will be disappointed to see that it stops. If you hate life and death, then you will be disappointed that it keeps going. So either way you go, you end up in a quandary, you end up in a labyrinth, because there is suffering if you love it, if you hate it. But if you just merely observed what happens, like right now there is this happening, right now there is that happening, right now I enjoy this, but it's just a mental feeling, a joyful mental feeling. Right now I cannot stand it. It is, we use all these complicated expressions. I cannot stand it. I'm deeply in disagreement. But we use all these fancy words to describe that there is mental displeasure. And this is why it's normally good to use simpler words, not for the sake of not having vocabulary to express, but also to not color things. Because we think that just because I say I don't like it and I say I'm deeply in hate with it, we think that these are two different things, but fundamentally, those both of them are mental displeasure, unpleasant feeling, period. If there's annoyance to the deepest hate, it's mental displeasure, unpleasant feeling. So whatever we may, this is what mindfulness and insight means. That you look at something and you want to see it for what it is, because you see, you saw it well, that you also saw that there is this continuous suffering in feelings, and the question was of yours, how can I give up this suffering coming from feelings? Now, if we cannot give up feelings in themselves, we have to give up the suffering that comes from them, and suffering comes, so the dependence is as such. When we have contact, then we have feeling. That feeling we can crave, and then we can cling to it. And that is how, in fact, the equation for suffering comes to be. Yes, of course, then there are further steps. If right now I cling to something, then my mind will tend towards wanting to experience again. So there might become, there will be becoming, so to say, a reappearance in the words, and then here I am born in the word because I was craving feeling, and in this dependent origination, for that from contact, feeling, then craving, then clinging, you see, we don't crave and we don't cling to views or to bodies. We cling to the feeling that they give to us. Let's really look at it. We have never craved one single being in the world. We have not craved one single food in the world. We have not craved or clinged to anything but feeling. This is why, feeling has a very big importance in the aggregates, because that is to what we hold on to. That we continuously hold, oh, I want to do this. That basically it simply means that it gives me mental pleasure. This is what it means. And if we simply see it, even if our mothers and fathers and the whole world is on a deathbed, and we have, let's say, unpleasantness, just see that it is unpleasantness. Don't try to combine it. Yes, because, don't try to find excuses why it came to be. The factuality is that it came to be through contact. That is how it came to be. And not because it was your mother, your father. That is also already in the feeling. It's not separate from it. So this is how you just simply cut that chain between the dog and the tree, and then the dog is released awareness. It can go wherever it wants, becoming free of ever landing on another tree. But as long as the dog doesn't know, or the being doesn't know that there is, and I use the dog not to, not as an offense. I used it as, for example, many times animals cannot realize they are suffering, and many times us human beings cannot realize our suffering either. This is why I wanted to use this example with sentient being that doesn't realize. And if you realize, oh well, because I'm attached to these things, it is that I suffer, then if I simply just look at them as feeling, and it is just a mere appearance through contact, it's not your feeling because it's not your contact. The contact happens with the senses. And the senses again are not yours because those are just accumulated atoms from the mother's womb. And the mother's womb is not yours. So knowing this, you have to see that feelings, for example, as the biggest source of suffering. One big source of suffering comes out of contact, not out of something else. It doesn't come from our hearts, from our souls. People use this word, oh, I love you from my heart. No, I love you because there is a contact between you and me, and then this contact gives me a joyful feeling, or I can create this contact mentally, this contact and connection, and then again I can have a joyful feeling. But it doesn't come out of our hearts and souls and bodies and everything. It comes because we touched physically or mentally an object, and that is how it comes to be. And if we understand this, even if feelings come because we still have bodies here and life keeps going, even though there is this feeling, there will be no obsession about it. So this is why mindfulness, and this is what mindfulness means, to be continuously aware, alert, and in check of what's going on, to be conscious of what's going on. And then there is freedom, because simply right now feeling happens, but there is no I making. You don't create an I of it. So it's like, oh, my feeling, or many times we even say this, you hurt my feelings, as if your feelings as such were a set of existence somewhere, whereas it just came to be because you had an unpleasant contact with something, and period. It wasn't because there were feelings by themselves which could be targeted. No, there's only one feeling at a time, unpleasant, or neutral, and these are the feelings. And body, it can be pleasant or unpleasant, and period. So there are 5 types of feelings. There are not more, not less. So when somebody says, you hurt my feelings, basically what happened is that what you told them, or what they saw from your part, that there was a contact because they saw it or they felt it, or in a way or another way, and then feeling came. And that is the feeling that is unpleasant, which is translated as you hurt my feelings, but it's simply, better said, an unpleasant feeling arose in me due to the contact with your action. This is what it is. And this is in a way to practice mindfulness. Right now there is this, there is that, and not something else. And when you observe these different happenings within the mind, within the body, just within yourself, just use very simple words to realize what it is. Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. You don't have to say it's love, it's hate. If you want to speak about love, then we already speak about divine abidings, which is, for example, loving kindness, when we wish the welfare of beings. But ultimately, for in our experience, it is joyful mental feeling. But of course, it manifests as the wish for the welfare of beings. So that is why we call it, for example, loving kindness, or it can be compassion when we want to remove the suffering of other beings. Or there can be appreciative joy. Even the name says that it is joyful, but right now we appreciate the welfare of beings. And then there's equanimity, which is already neutral feeling. But basically what I wanted to say is this is mindfulness. And within yourself, whenever there is suffering, isn't it already pleasant and blissful to at least say, oh, here is suffering. And right away, you care less. And I hope that you couldn't care less. That would be the best. Because these are just feelings. And, when we speak about the cessation of feeling, it doesn't mean that, many times people might think it means, becoming a psychopath or something like that, but it's not true, because this is, so to say, cooling down the senses, because with feelings there's continuously like heat, as long as there is an attachment to their coming and going, and as long as there is, we have to be mindful about them. But when we speak about the void, for example, or simply liberation as the cessation of feeling, you shouldn't see it as something woeful or something that you shouldn't strive for, because you have to see feeling as something that is dependently coming. It comes with respect to something else. For example, if a being is blind, they already have no contact with visible objects. So in a way, feeling for them with respect to visible objects has ceased. Of course, it is not a cessation that we mean like absolute freedom, but they are free from the visible objects in that sense. Or if somebody is deaf, then the respective objects are simply not experienced. Therefore, for them, there is no experience of feeling with respect to the seen, to the heard, or if there are other things that are missing from the senses, then those things also are missing, because contact cannot happen, because right now you can see that contact happens because of the senses. So the six doors, so to say, the five senses plus the mind door. So knowing this, you have to look at feelings, and that there is nothing enjoyable about them. They are like a hunter that continuously runs after their prey, and when the time comes, it shoots them. If it's not the time, it doesn't shoot them. That ultimately is like a shadow that comes after you, even while you're listening to my voice. Because you hear it, it means that the ear, it contacts the object, namely the sound, and then there's a feeling. Now you may have pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling towards this voice, and that is it. It's not that my voice is pleasurable, unpleasurable, or neutral. It is that this is what is made up in the wide contact is, established. So I hope that it answered the question. If there is something that was unclear, then please.
Thank you, Krishna. That was great to go through that. That's something to listen back to time after time, and it is a practice. It should be something easy to do, and it feels like for me and probably most people, it's one of the most difficult things to do. Practice and being aware and mindfulness, all of that helps a lot. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure. If there is any other, yes, please.
Yes, 1 second. The one that Robert sent. He says, I guess what I'm asking, how do we break free of a system of control? We're stuck to conform to the will of others. No matter, we are still bound to the laws of man that govern us. And this goes with it. What about not wanting to have people have control over me? Like having to comply to other people's beliefs because we are stuck having to abide by their rules. For instance, government or authority having to abide by their laws they impose upon me. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to answer it in a twofold way. I want to give an answer which is more spiritual, and another one which is more rational. I mean, also the spiritual is rational, but you will understand. So the laws of God, the government. So, these times of the planets of humanity could be said to be, in a way, I would not say the most peaceful, but I will say that right now at least we have a type of system where if you do certain things, how to say this, there is a certain justice that will be made. So for example, if you look at communism, that we didn't like because we realized that it's like there's a dictator that will dictate what to do. This and that we didn't like because whatever reasons. And right now we are, democratic. We can choose our leaders, and this is the best. For now, this is the best way to handle society, because right now at least people tell what they want, and of course there are different groups of people who want different things, but at least we work on basis of majority. Like, this is what most people wanted, so will it be. So this, we have to see that, right now people cannot do whatever thing they want because there are laws and there is a system of justice that will try to do its best. Of course, you can argue that it's not perfect. Of course not, because it all depends on the wisdom of human beings. And as long as this planet is the planet which we call, well, in fact, this plane of existence from a more spiritual standpoint is the first one on which we are capable to be liberated. So anything below human being, namely animals and the such, are not capable to be liberated. So we are already capable of that. This is a good thing. So, the government and the laws on the first hand were created to try to create a balance, to try to create harmony. And of course, then we have people who will try to play out the system. What can you do? It is what it is. But to answer from a more spiritual way, we said from previously this dependent origination, dependent arising, that birth comes from becoming, which comes from clinging, which comes from craving, which comes from feeling, which comes from contact, which comes from senses, and which comes from mind and body. Okay, so you have to see this as the following. It is the result of previous deeds, of previous whatever, that you were born here in that particular place where you were born, and it was not a conscious choice for most beings. Instead, it was simply the results of any past mental or physical action. And therefore, where we are right now, it is a resultant. We planted the seeds who knows when, at some point, and right now we are here harvesting the fruits. So it is, at the end of the day, our doing that we had an attachment in a way or another way, or we had something to do with the physical so that we are here. And most of the times it's clinging to something in the physical. So having said that, we call this feeling, when we feel that there are things imposed on us and we cannot do anything, we call this suffering injustice. And about suffering injustice, a wise person once said, don't be upset with suffering injustice because it makes sense. And it makes sense in the sense presented previously, that it comes because there was a past clinging, a past wish, a past desire for something, and then here we are again. So it is your own doing, it's not somebody else's doing. And even the fact that people impose things on you, that is also, in a way, your doing, that you were born in that situation. Now, what can you do with that? If you can be well with suffering injustice, if you can say, yes, this is my doing, this is the karma that I created for myself, right now I just enjoy the fruits of my deeds, then you can already be well with whatever happens. And you must be very aware of is that if a resultant means the results of that previous deed, if the resultant of something has already happened to you, you have suffered injustice, that particular thing you will never have to suffer again, that exact same thing. So if, let's say, once, who knows when, who knows how, you desired that a being should be, a being's legs should be cut off, just an example, some thousand and million years ago. And now you are born without legs, for example, and this might be seen as suffering injustice. Just be well understanding that this thing at least has come to fruition and never again will it have to occur. So just knowing this, that here was the seed, here is the fruit, I am well with it, I cannot do anything about it, so be it. This is the freedom what I speak about, that, here we speak about mental freedom, but mental freedom doesn't come because we have the freedom of speech. It comes to when we understand with insight all these different things that go around us. So if you were born without legs, for example, why cannot you just be well with it? Well, it is what it is. This is the simple result of one of my deeds. Well, why should I be upset or happy about that? As I said, don't hate life and death, and don't love life and death. So basically, another type of vision that can be applied onto this scenario of suffering injustice is the following. And I want those who are with me right now to answer this. So basically, when we feel that there is suffering injustice, that we suffer injustice, ultimately what bothers us is that there is this form of ours, namely the body, that has to be around people that it wouldn't like to be around, right or wrong?
Correct.
Okay, if it's the form that is the problem, then I ask the following question. When the being is in its mother's womb, okay, and the mother eats a piece of bread and drinks whatever, tea, and then eats some other things, that food slowly will also support the growth of the baby, right or wrong?
Right.
It's also true that the baby itself came to be through 1 + 1 cells from the father and the mother, correct? Or not correct?
Correct.
And the question then comes, is there any type of I in the male and female so to say, those 1 + 1 cells, is there any type of I? Would you consider, okay, I will ask this like this. Would you consider yourself that piece of cell from the mother and that one piece from your father?
No.
Would you consider yourself the foods that your mother ate and drank when the baby was in the womb?
No. They're atoms.
They're atoms. So certain atoms from certain sources come together in a certain way. So do atoms have self? Would you consider yourself a fallen piece of hair or skin?
No.
No. So if you say that there is no self in these atoms. So then if I put together thousands of atoms, can they create a self?
No.
No. So this form that seems to be many times the root of anger, ultimately, so to say, for a being of wisdom, there is no birth, because there is nothing that is born. There is just the mere coming together of feelings, of atoms. That is it. So these atoms come together, what we call it, or the body, the baby, period. Where in the picture is the self? Where am I born in the whole scenario? This is the question.
You're not.
So if I have never suffered birth, then how could I actually be affected by the sorrows coming with birth?
It's in the mind.
Correct. So ultimately, birth has, this is why we say, I mean, there are several reasons for which we say this, but we say birth is a fiction. Because you cannot negate that something was born, but you cannot affirm that something was born. And therefore we say that those things that seem to exist but doesn't exist, we call them fiction, because it's not a wise thing to try to describe whether a fiction exists or doesn't exist, right or wrong. Like a fiction, like a, let's say a movie, a fiction movie, absolutely fiction with animations. Can you say it exists or doesn't exist?
No, and using that example, that was the example we saw too, right? The fiction movie.
Fiction movie, you cannot say that it exists or doesn't exist, because either way you will have a contradiction. But the same happens with life, because yes, it's a factuality that there's a film, and there's a factuality that there is materiality. But the things that happen in the film are already not true. And also when the baby is born, the self is also not true. And this is how the baby becomes the fiction, and the movie, the skiffy movie becomes a fiction. And this is why we don't negate or affirm it, because it is pointless to affirm to or negate the existence of such things. So this is how you have to look at the body. And if you can look at the body and discern it as mere atoms, period, because you have to see that the body hasn't come down from heavens or whatever. It came to be from the body, from the mother's body, and that only produces atoms. I mean, if you want to make any objection in the whole scenario, but when birth is given, there is simply a functional set of atoms, what we call life. So if you can discern the body as just a lot of atoms, like just see like a lot of small balls on each other, okay? This is how you should see it. A lot of small balls. Imagine like this body is made of like 10,000 small balls which continuously move, okay? If you close your eyes and just see for a moment, just look at the body as 10,000 small, or just like I would say 1,000 like small balls on each other, like so to say a compact structure. And if you look at it as such, you already lose the interest in finding the self, because where is it?
Not there.
It's not there. So this is why we call these aggregates, because they come together. They are groups of formations. The body is one formation because it comes from materiality. Feeling comes from contact, and contact comes from the senses. So the senses come with birth, obviously. And experience simply comes because there is mind and body. And then perception in the sense of memory comes from experience, which becomes a memory. And then mental formation, which means like beliefs and views, come from those perceptions and the feelings associated with them, period. So these are the 5 aggregates. And what is out of the 5 aggregates? Why, from the non-duality point of view, we say that it is freedom that is outside the 5 aggregates, what we call existence, consciousness, bliss. Because the 5 aggregates, you have to see everything that is alternating and changing is to be seen as part of the aggregate. If there's something which doesn't alternate and doesn't change, then that is beyond the aggregates. And there's only one thing beyond the aggregates, namely the cessation of conditional things. So you see, whenever we speak about peace, many times we call it cessation, but ultimately it is the cessation of conditional phenomena. And conditional is that which came to be through dependence. And whenever even the Buddha described Nirvana, he says, it is that which does not arise. It is not the mere absence of the conditional things, but that is the unconditional, because it didn't come to be as... why is it that Nirvana is not just the absence of conditions? It's because then Nirvana could be also just the consequence of destroying conditions, rather than something which is always there, which is the factuality that Nirvana, like, so to say, peace is always there, only that we have to make effort to realize it. But because Nirvana is not the mere consequence, so freedom is not the mere consequence, it cannot be, if it is called unconditional, then it means that it cannot be the simple destruction of the feathers, for example, because then Nirvana simply could be the resultant of destroying the feathers, which is not so. So that is why there is one thing by destroying the conditional, like making it cease and realizing the unbound, the deathless. And many times this cessation might seem that it's something negative, but it's the cessation of that which is anyway filled with suffering. It's not the cessation of suffering and peace. It is just the cessation of suffering. And because then it is that this unconditional reality is realized when the mind tends towards the unconditional. So it is not something that is the absence. It is something very, so to say, positively described. Even the void has to be seen, because the void is indeed this peace, to be seen as something very positively described. It's not a negatively termed thing, because that is the best way to describe, peace as cessation, because all these conditional things have to cease. But it is not that then there's nothing there, like annihilation, because there is the realization, the here and now freedom, which is effectuality and not just the mere destruction of everything. If there is anything else that anyone would like to ask.
Yes. Om Krishna, thank you for that. There is one thing when you were speaking about a democratic government and communism. Well, what is happening nowadays is hidden communism, whereby such as the virus, such as the voting in the United States, where there has been fraud and manipulation, the assassination of certain presidents in the United States. There are some energies, and this is worldwide, this is not just in the United States. There is injustice abound, and it seems to be heightening as well. And what we have seen is that the virus was let loose and it was it's biological. And so these forces that enjoy creating chaos and havoc for people, like to even immigration, people wanting to get away from countries and places that are suppressive, and they want freedom, they want liberation. And so in a way we do have communism because our votes are not heard. We are not heard. Our media is controlled. Our one sec. Our ones about the media that speak about the truth and so forth, they get put in jail, and they get stuck there. And there are many injustices and many things done against the people of the world. So please speak on this and reference to the void to give those listening or share with those listening how even though in those situations, if for any reason they would occur around you, how to still remain in the void as the void, ceasing no matter what goes on around you, how to do that. Thank you.
Okay. So the number one thing that I would say is the following. When all these things happen, like fraud and injustice, that is a very good moment to be disillusioned and be displeased with materiality, because the problem with materiality is that it seems to be so hard to get rid of it, like sensual desires, ill will, all these things are part of materiality. But the point is to see that those things cannot give any satisfaction, because wherever you go, there are people and groups that have views. Wherever you look, there are people who want to teach you some of their nonsense. And seeing this in materiality, this should be the thing that if somebody is truly on the path and wants to understand and wants to go on, this is what you have to learn from it. That there is nothing that you could imagine enjoying. There's nothing that could give you pleasure. And those who are not on the path, it anyway doesn't matter, because they would anyway get into mischief here or there. So there is only suffering for them. But for those who want to get release from this unsatisfactory reality, you have to see, just to be completely detached and being completely disillusioned and equanimous towards all these things in the world. Because as long as, for example, you have a view, like a doubtful thinking and opinions, you know that you cannot simply follow the path because of that attachment, strong attachment. You have to, strive and understand how they come to be, and that they are not eternally there. So that is the thing that you have to do. Just remind yourself that is suffering injustice. It comes from past seeds. Here it is the fruit that is harvested, and I have no business with the world, because what is there anyway for me to find? And like this, you can go on untouched, undisturbed, and the depth of peace, like how deep your wellness is, even when injustice happens, it depends very much on how deeply you understood this mindfulness, how deeply you could practice seeing that it is injustice, unpleasant feeling, and so on. So yes, I understand it is many times frustrating, but at some point you must be disillusioned and dispassionate about reality that is going on here, so that the mind doesn't tend towards it anymore. if it's satisfies the question.
Very. Yes, and I think I know that'll be most helpful to others that listen later on to have some deep insight about what to do and what not to do. Yes, thank you. Ma B, do you have any other questions or anything you'd like to say before we wrap this up?
Yes, that does help, Krishna. Because we all can get wrapped up in so many things, and it can affect us all. And to step back away from it, and the way you explained it, that helps a lot. So thank you for this. Krishna Speaks. It's always it helps open up a lot of things. So thank you very much, and thank you, Ma Al. My tiny little brain is ready to. Anyway, I took off the chains again, trying to. I got out the chain cutters. So, thank you.
That was great, Ma. I got out the bowl cutters. Yes. Always insightful, Krishna. Thank you so much. Shall we go ahead and wrap it up?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all who have listened. If you have any further questions, insight, or help that you need, there's information down below in the details. Thank you.